Toronto on a Tuesday evening was a city dressed in quiet light. Streetcars hummed down Queen Street, their windows glowing faintly as if carrying little pieces of warmth through the early spring chill. Emily pushed open the door of a modest but charming restaurant tucked between a record shop and an old brick bookstore. A bell above the door rang a little too loudly, making her shoulders tighten. For a moment, she felt as though the entire room had turned to look at her. No one had, but her nerves didn't need proof to flare. She smoothed the sides of her vintage dress pearl-colored, fitted at the waist, fraying just slightly at the seams. It had been her mother's dress once. Emily had only worn it once before, years ago, to her college graduation. Tonight, it felt less like fabric and more like armor, stitched with hope. Her blonde curls had been carefully arranged that afternoon in her tiny Toronto apartment. She had dusted a faint shade of pink onto her lips, using makeup she could barely afford. In her purse, folded neatly in the smallest pocket, was a single $10 bill. Her emergency fund, her lifeline, her reminder that she could not afford to dream too much. It was all she had if things went badly tonight. The hostess appeared, smiling politely, clipboard in hand. "Reservation for Emily?" The girl's voice was firmer than Emily's heartbeat felt. Emily nodded, managing a soft yes. The hostess guided her through a corridor of tables lit by candles and soft yellow lamps. The restaurant wasn't five-star, but it was warm, inviting, with navy linens draped over polished wood and quiet jazz weaving through the clinking of cutlery. To Emily, it felt like the most beautiful place she had ever been taken for dinner. She sat at a small table by the window, clutching her purse on her lap as though someone might try to take it. She checked the time. 6:45 p.m. She was 15 minutes early. Good. She needed to breathe, to prepare herself, to quiet the storm of her doubts. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe, just maybe, the long string of disappointments would finally break. Her date's name was Aaron. They had matched on a dating app weeks earlier. His messages had been short, but thoughtful, not pushy, not crude like so many others. When he suggested this restaurant, she had hesitated. It seemed too nice, too far from the places she could usually afford, but eventually she said yes. It had taken months for her to even consider agreeing to meet anyone. In truth, it had been years. At a table across the room, a man stirred his glass of scotch. His suit was charcoal gray, his posture relaxed, but his eyes alert. His name was Nathan Carter, a CEO who had flown in from Vancouver for a business meeting earlier that day. He had expected nothing from the evening, just a quiet meal before heading back to his hotel. But when Emily walked in, her hesitant step, the way she carried both hope and trembling in her shoulders, it caught his attention. He had not meant to linger, but something about her presence had pinned him in place. Time slid by. 7 o'clock. Then 7:15. Emily's smile had faded into a tight line. She checked her phone, read the last message from Aaron. "Can't wait to see you tonight." She forced a small smile at the memory of it, but the emptiness of the screen in her hand grew heavier with every second. At 7:15 she sent a text. "Hey, I'm here. Just checking in." No reply. By 7:30, she called. It rang once, then slipped into voicemail. Her heart sank, though her face tried desperately not to show it. A server approached her table with polite gentleness. "Would you like to order something, miss?" "We're starting to fill up." Emily blinked, her throat dry. "Oh, I'm waiting for someone." "Just a little longer." The server nodded and walked away, leaving her with her silence. She opened her purse and stared at the crumpled $10 bill. She had told herself she wouldn't touch it, not unless she absolutely had to. She had thought maybe she would just order tea if her date didn't show. Still, she had hoped he would walk through the door, offer a smile, maybe even share the bill, maybe even see her. That was all she had really wanted, to be seen. Her phone buzzed. Relief surged until she opened the message. "Wow, you actually went. I was just messing with you. Sorry, but you're not really my type. Not worth the Uber." Another message followed seconds later. "You seem nice, but seriously, you thought I was coming?" The screen blurred. She blinked hard, fighting the sting in her eyes. Her jaw clenched. Around her, the restaurant moved in easy laughter and the rhythm of silverware. But to Emily, it all dissolved into static. She folded her napkin in trembling hands. her spine straightening like it was the only thing keeping her from collapsing. She would not cry, not here, not in front of strangers. From across the room, Nathan saw it. He hadn't read her messages, but he didn't need to. He saw the color drain from her face, the way she tightened her posture, the refusal to break. It was all too familiar. Once, long ago, he too had waited not for a date that never came, but for someone to believe he was enough. Emily sat frozen for a long moment, then shifted, as though the weight of the world pressed against her chest. She placed her purse on the table, slipped her phone inside, and looked toward the door. She wanted to vanish, to walk out with dignity before her forehead cracked. She pressed her hand against her stomach. Hunger gnawed beneath the emotional bruises. She had only been drinking water, too afraid to spend the money she didn't have. She rose from her chair slowly, every movement heavy. Just as she turned toward the exit, a server appeared beside her with a steaming plate of pasta and a glass of sparkling lemonade. "Excuse me, miss," the server said gently. "Your order." Emily blinked, confused. I didn't order this." The server smiled. "It's been taken care of. Someone requested it for you. Your tab is covered." Emily froze, her brows furrowed. Was this another trick? Another cruel joke? Her first instinct was fear. She glanced around the restaurant, unsure. And then, from just behind her, a calm voice spoke. Low, steady, without pity. "It's not charity. It's a reminder. You deserve to eat, even if the world tries to tell you otherwise." Emily turned, startled. Nathan Carter stood, one hand resting on the back of his chair, his expression unreadable except for the quiet honesty in his eyes. Nathan didn't move closer or make a speech. He simply nodded toward the table by the window and, in the kind of voice that made crowded rooms go quiet, said, "Please sit. Eat while it's warm." Emily looked at the pasta as if it might vanish if she blinked. Steam curled upward in thin ribbons. Lemon bubbles ticked against the glass. For a heartbeat she considered refusing, out of pride, out of habit, out of that scrappy instinct that had carried her through too many lean months. But hunger spoke first, and something gentler followed behind it, a permission she rarely gave herself. She lowered back into the chair. Her hands trembled when she picked up the fork. The first bite landed like a small miracle, heat spreading through her chest, untangling a knot she hadn't realized she'd been breathing around all evening. Nathan took the seat opposite, leaving a comfortable space between them as if the table itself might be fragile, and he didn't want to put too much weight on it. He didn't ask questions. He didn't tell her everything would be okay. He let the soft clink of cutlery and the pulse of quiet jazz carry the silence, so it didn't feel like a verdict. After a minute, she found her voice. "You didn't have to." He smiled, faint, almost apologetic. "I know." Another few seconds passed. "Thank you," she added, and the words surprised her with how much they weighed. Gratitude had edges when it came from a place this raw. He leaned back slightly, studying the candlelight rather than her face, as though he wanted to make it easier for her to breathe. "It took me a long time to learn there's a difference between pity and witness," he said at last. "One makes you smaller. The other reminds you you're still here." Emily's fork hovered in midair. She felt the sentence nestle into a part of her that had been shivering all night. "You don't know me," she whispered, gentle, not as a challenge but as a fact laid carefully on the table. "True," he said, "but I know the way it looks when someone stands their ground on a bad night." A server drifted by and quietly refilled her water, the practiced choreography of the place folding around their table like a curtain. Outside the window, a streetcar rolled past, its bell tinging faintly as if in agreement with the evening's pivot. Emily took another bite, slower, her shoulders releasing one notch. She noticed the details she'd missed on arrival. A framed black and white photograph of the restaurant from the 1970s. A shelf of glass bottles that wasn't quite symmetrical and therefore charming. The way the hostess laughed with her eyes when she said goodnight to leaving couples. Life still happening. Even here, even now. "What's your name?" she asked, finally letting curiosity nibble at the edges of her caution. "Nathan," he said. "Nathan Carter." She repeated it in her head as if testing the weight of each syllable. "Emily," she offered. "I gathered," he said, nodding toward the reservation card tucked beside the candle. Warmth rose to her cheeks. "Right," He reached for the small glass of scotch he had been ignoring and rotated it once between his fingers, not drinking. "If it helps," he said softly. "I once waited an entire hour for a meeting that was never going to happen. I knew it 10 minutes in, but I stayed." Stubbornness masquerading as hope, her lips twitched. "I might understand that better than I want to admit." He didn't tell her what kind of meeting, or who hadn't shown. He didn't list his accomplishments to balance the confession. He just let the shared shape of disappointment sit between them like a folded coat. Not something to be worn right now, but proof that it existed and they'd both carried it before. "What were you hoping for tonight?" he asked, a question that could easily have sounded invasive. Somehow, it didn't. She considered lying, then surprised herself by telling the truth. "To be treated like I wasn't a joke," she said. "Like the idea of me wasn't a dare someone took on a group chat." He nodded once, not dramatizing his reaction, not performing outrage on her behalf. "That's not too much to want," he said. "It's the bare minimum." She took another bite. The pasta tasted brighter now, lemon and butter waking up her tongue. When she looked up, he wasn't watching her eat. He was studying the window as though the city were a novel, and he hadn't yet finished the page. The restraint eased her. "What made you do this?" Emily asked, gesturing lightly at the plate. The water, the unexpected kindness that had rearranged the entire map of her evening. Nathan's mouth tilted at the corner. "I saw you calculating how long you could sit here on water before someone asked you to leave," he said. "I don't like that math. I've done it." Different numbers, same feeling. The admission startled her. "You, me," he said simply. A table behind them broke into laughter. Somewhere near the bar, a cork popped. Emily's phone lay face down now, a small square of silence. For the first time since the awful text, she didn't feel like a spotlight was aimed at her pain. The feeling wasn't quite comfort, it was more sober than that, but it was steady. Like a hand near her back that didn't push, didn't steer, just stayed close enough to keep her from tipping. "I'm in school," she said, surprising herself again. "Nursing, it's a lot." He nodded without the performative enthusiasm people sometimes offered when they didn't understand the work. "It is," he agreed. "Some of the best people I know are nurses. They keep the world from falling apart in the quiet ways." She blinked quickly. "I'm not one of the best yet. Best is a trap word," he said. Showing up is real. There it was again, that gentle refrain. The way his sentences were calibrated not to dazzle but to land. She glanced at his wrist, the understated watch, at the way his suit sat cleanly on his frame. He looked like money without trying, which normally would have set her on edge. But nothing in his posture asked to be admired. He seemed, if anything, careful not to be the main character in this scene. The server returned with a small dish of sorbet raspberry and pale gold. Lemon sat down with a conspiratorial smile, as if the dessert itself had chosen the right table. "On the house," he murmured. Emily laughed softly, the sound breaking through her ribs like sunlight in a late spring cloud. "This is," she began, then stopped, because any adjective she picked would make it smaller. Nathan leaned forward the tiniest bit, elbows grazing the table without claiming it. "You don't owe me anything," he said, answering the question she hadn't asked. "No future conversation. No performance of gratitude. Eat, then walk out as if you deserved to be here all along. Because you did." She ate the sorbet slowly, letting cold sweetness steady the last tremors in her hands. For a long minute they sat in an ease that felt unearned, and therefore all the more precious. She noticed the small scar near his hairline, the barely there fatigue under his eyes, the way he inhaled before speaking as though he edited himself even in breath. "You're good at talking to strangers," she said, teasing without teeth. He chuckled once. "I'm good at not making a bad night worse." Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "I have a daughter. She's 3. I think she's teaching me more than I'm teaching her." The admission settled like a stone in clear water, no drama, just expanding ripples. Emily didn't flinch. She didn't reach for a polite script. "She's lucky," she said. "So am I," he replied, and the simplicity of it made something in her chest loosen. A small draft moved through the room when the door opened for departing guests, and the candle flame on their table wavered. Emily watched it flutter back to steady, and in that tiny choreography she recognized the evening itself, shaken, not snuffed. She wiped her mouth, laid the napkin carefully on the table, and sat a little taller. "I should go," she said, not as an escape but as a decision. "Early morning. Clinical shift." He nodded. "Of course." He slid a small card across the table, plain, not glossy. The kind that didn't try too hard. A name, a number, and the name of a café scrawled by hand under the print. A place near a library in a quieter corner of the city. "I stop there some mornings," he said. "For coffee, not company." The corner of her mouth lifted. Noted. She stood, and this time the air didn't feel like it might push her back down. He didn't rush to pull out her chair or make a show of escorting her to the door. He stayed seated, hands folded, offering a nod that landed somewhere between farewell and acknowledgement. At the threshold, she looked back once. He hadn't moved. He was watching the window again, not her, and somehow that felt right. Outside, Toronto had slipped from blue into indigo, streetlights haloing puddles from an afternoon rain. She tucked the card into her purse and stepped into the evening with a quiet that felt like strength, rather than defeat. Halfway down the block, the streetcar bell chimed. She paused at the curb, the city's breath in her lungs, and realized her hands had stopped shaking. In the reflection of a storefront glass, she caught a glimpse of herself, same dress, same frayed seams but different eyes. Not the kind that begged to be chosen, but the kind that had chosen to stay for dinner. She almost laughed at the thought. A ridiculous, beautiful metric, tonight. She had measured her worth in warm pasta and the mercy of sorbet, and somehow the sum had come out higher than zero. Back in the restaurant, Nathan watched his breath fog the window and disappear. He took a sip of the scotch, the first of the night, and let it unfurl. He wasn't thinking about rescue or fate or grand gestures. He was thinking about how a stranger had reminded him that the world still contained small, repairable things, a hunger, a sentence offered at the right temperature, a $10 bill left untouched. He set the glass down, signed his receipt, and slipped the pen back into his pocket with the practiced motion of someone accustomed to finishing tasks quietly. Emily rode the streetcar home with her forehead against the cool glass, the city sliding by in long ribbons of light. When her phone buzzed, she braced then exhaled. It was a university email about schedule changes, nothing that could bruise her. She scrolled past the earlier messages without opening them. Some things didn't deserve a second viewing. At her stop, she stepped down, climbed the stairs to the sidewalk, and felt the apartment's familiar weightlessness approach. The tiny kitchen with the thrifted kettle, the bookshelf built from old crates, the plant that refused to die in weak window light. She turned the key and stood for a moment in the doorway before she flipped the switch. The room blinked awake. On the small table by the window, a stack of flashcards waited for her next late-night study session. A smear of highlighter frozen mid-thought across the top card. She placed her purse beside them and, without quite knowing why, pulled the simple card back out to read the handwritten cafe name again. She left it there, just under the edge of her plant pot, where the morning sun would find it. Not a promise, not a plan, just a marker in the map of a city that, for the first time in a while, felt a fraction kinder. Then she boiled water for tea, the kettle whistling a soft, domestic victory, and sat down to study full, for once, in all the ways that mattered. The following weekend, Toronto carried the mood of early spring again, cool air threaded with the faint smell of thawing earth. Emily had slipped into her favorite study spot, the downtown library, with high ceilings and glass walls that made you feel both tiny and infinite at the same time. Her textbooks lay spread across a small wooden table, pages covered with fluorescent streaks. She tapped her pen against the margin, trying to memorize symptoms of pediatric conditions, when the bitter scent of espresso drifted past her. She looked up. At first, she thought she was imagining him, Nathan, the man from the restaurant. He wasn't in his suit this time. His jacket was off, sleeves rolled above his wrists, hair a little less controlled. He sat in the corner, laptop open, a paper cup beside him. It took her a few seconds to register that he'd already noticed her. He lifted his cup in a subtle toast, almost like a question. "Still here?" She blinked, smiled despite herself, and raised her pen in reply. At the cafe attached to the library. Minutes later, she found him waiting with a cup of cappuccino. "Emily," he said, as though the name carried its own warmth. You remembered my name, she teased. Lightly, I remembered your courage, he answered. The name was the easy part. They sat together in a comfortable silence. Nathan asked nothing about that night. No pitying references, no awkward jokes. Instead, he shared a story about a failed product launch in his company, a line of toddler snacks that had been roasted online by a food blogger. The way he told it, with humor rather than ego, made her laugh for real. So yes, he concluded, we briefly became famous for selling what looked like cardboard disguised as crackers. My team still teases me, Emily chuckled, covering her mouth with her hand. It felt good, uncalculated, the kind of laugh that left no guilt behind. For once, she wasn't the struggling student. She was simply a person sitting at a table with someone who didn't expect her to apologize for existing. Nathan, for his part, wasn't the CEO with polished lines. He was just a man recounting his own failures, making them human enough for her to step into without shame. When she stood to leave for her next shift at the hospital, she half expected him to stop her, to ask for her number, to press something too quickly. Instead, he nodded, a simple gesture of respect, and let her go. Outside, she realized she was smiling not because she had been saved, but because she had been heard. Days turned into weeks. Study, hospital shifts, late nights, coffee, repeat. Yet every so often, a text arrived, thought of you during this nutrition seminar. Or, Lily said something hilarious again today, almost told you, then deleted the message. They were half-formed connections, never demanding, always light, like someone leaving breadcrumbs without pushing her to follow. One Tuesday afternoon, Nathan sent an invitation. There's a workshop on child nutrition at the university downtown. Registration is covered. Thought you'd find it useful, no pressure. Emily stared at the screen for a long moment before saying yes. The hall was modest, filled with young mothers, pediatricians, and a handful of curious students. Emily sat near the back, her hair tied into a neat bun, notebook ready. She listened, absorbed, raised her hand when questions opened. How are store-bought snacks tested for allergens? And what happens if a child's symptoms don't match common reactions? The panelist's approving nod told her she had struck a thoughtful chord. Nathan, seated across the room, didn't intervene. He only watched her with quiet pride, as if he were witnessing something inevitable. To him, Emily wasn't the girl left alone at a dinner table. She was the woman asking questions that one day might save a child's life. When the workshop ended, while most students crowded the snack table or handed out resumes, Emily slipped out quietly toward her sanctuary, the library. She was halfway there when she felt a presence. Nathan, walking a step behind. Beside him, a tiny figure peeked from behind his legs. "This is Lily," he said softly. "My daughter. She's 3, a little shy at first." Emily crouched down to the girl's eye level. "Hi, Lily." Her voice was gentle, patient. Lily blinked, hesitant, then shuffled forward. She tugged at the hem of Emily's cardigan and whispered, "You smell pretty, like my mommy used to." The words landed like a pebble in a pond, ripples reaching everywhere. Emily froze, her chest tightening. Nathan's jaw flexed as he looked away, blinking twice. Fighting something deeper than he'd expected, Emily knelt again, this time steady. "Well," she said softly, "that's the biggest compliment I've ever been given." Lily's small shoulders eased, as if some unspoken bridge had already been built for Nathan. It was more than a moment. It was memory bleeding into the present, the ghost of a lullaby, the echo of a woman he had lost far too early. He cleared his throat, forcing the storm back behind his ribs. "Come on, sweet pea," he murmured. Guiding Lily toward the picture book shelves, Emily stayed still for a breath, holding the weight of what had just unfolded. She wasn't sure what path this was leading her down, but she knew the ground had shifted. What began as a ruined blind date was slowly becoming something larger, something that scared her in the best and worst ways at once. Outside, Toronto's evening lights were flickering awake again. She hugged her bag closer, her heart louder than the streetcars. She was no longer invisible, and that, terrifying as it was, might change everything. The days that followed were stitched together with ordinary routines. Emily's nursing shifts at the hospital, nights buried in textbooks, Nathan's board. Meetings and quiet dinners with Lily, but beneath the surface, a thread was pulling them closer. Neither said it aloud. They didn't have to. Small moments did the work. A shared laugh at a coffee shop. A question she asked that lingered in his mind long after she'd left. The way Lily started asking when Miss Emily might come by again. One Wednesday evening, rain tapped against the tall glass windows of Nathan's Vancouver townhouse. The city lights bled across the wet pavement like watercolor. Inside, the warmth of a fireplace did its best to chase away the damp chill. Nathan sat on the couch with his laptop balanced on one knee. Lily curled up at his side with flushed cheeks and restless eyes. "She's been warm since this afternoon," he muttered into the phone, then sighed after the nurse on call gave her generic advice. He hung up, feeling the weight of helplessness every parent knows. The doorbell rang. He wasn't expecting anyone. Opening the door, he found Emily standing there with her backpack slung over one shoulder, a towel folded neatly in her arms. "I heard Lily wasn't feeling well," she said softly. "I brought this." She held up the towel, already damp with lavender water. "Old trick from the hospital. Helps the head and the heart." Nathan stepped aside without a word. Emily knelt beside the little girl, pressing the cool cloth gently against her forehead. Lily let out a tiny sigh, her tense body relaxing almost instantly. Emily hummed under her breath, a quiet melody that floated through the room like mist. Nathan froze, his chest tightening. He knew that tune. He hadn't heard it in years. It was the lullaby his late wife used to sing when Lily was a baby. He stared at Emily, unable to move, his throat burning. Emily noticed but didn't stop. She kept her voice low, steady, weaving the song into the air until Lily's eyelids fluttered shut and she drifted into sleep. Only then did Emily glance over her shoulder. Nathan sat with his face in his hands, silent. "I didn't know," she whispered. "You couldn't have." He rasped, his voice cracked against the weight of memory. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain against the glass. Finally, he said hoarsely, "She used to sing that every night." I thought Lily had forgotten. Emily looked down at the sleeping child nestled against her. She brushed a strand of hair from Lily's forehead. "Children don't forget love," she said softly. "They just wait to hear it again." The words carved something open inside Nathan, raw and undeniable. He wanted to thank her, but language felt too clumsy. Instead, he sat there, the silence heavy, but not empty. Emily stayed on the floor beside the couch, her hand resting lightly on Lily's small one, as if she had always belonged in that spot. Later, after Lily was tucked into bed, Emily gathered her things quietly. "I should go," she said, not wanting to intrude. Nathan followed her to the door, his steps slow, reluctant. He reached out, not to stop her but to steady himself. "You don't know what that meant," he said. His eyes shone in the dim light, older and younger at once. Emily hesitated, her hand on the doorknob. "I didn't do anything," she murmured. "You reminded me," he said, "that she's still here, that I'm not failing her as badly as I thought." The words hung between them, fragile as glass. Emily wanted to reach out, to bridge the impossible gap between grief and comfort. But fear held her still. This wasn't her place. And yet, some part of her, the part that had been abandoned, the part that still longed to be chosen, recognized the echo of his loneliness. "Good night, Nathan," she whispered. Then she slipped into the rain, her footsteps fading against the wet concrete. Nathan stood at the doorway long after she was gone, listening to the lullaby still echoing faintly in his chest. He knew the next morning would arrive with meetings and deadlines, that the world would expect him to be untouchable again. But tonight, under the fragile rhythm of rain, he allowed himself to remember that he was still human, and that maybe, just maybe, there was someone else who had seen it too. The first hints of summer crept into Vancouver, with cherry blossoms scattered like pink confetti across sidewalks and long evenings that stretched lazily into gold. Emily had finished another late shift at the hospital when she checked her email in the staff lounge. The subject line froze her breath. "Congratulations on your acceptance." She opened it with shaking hands. It was the scholarship she had secretly applied for months ago, a full year at the University of British Columbia, specializing in pediatric nursing. Full tuition, living stipend, everything she had ever dreamed of. For years she had carried the weight of almosts. Almost enough money, almost enough time, almost enough belief. And now, here it was, delivered in black letters across a glowing screen, a chance to step into the version of herself she had always imagined. But the exhilaration carried a shadow. Vancouver was Nathan and Lily, the townhouse with its warm fireplace, the kitchen counter where Emily had once leaned, laughing at Nathan's dry humor, the little girl who had tugged her cardigan and whispered that she smelled like her mother. Could she walk away from that? Could she risk losing it before it even had the chance to become something permanent? That evening, she met Nathan and Lily at a small park by the seawall. Lily was chasing pigeons in her tiny sneakers, giggling each time they scattered. Nathan leaned against a bench, hands in his pockets, his gaze softer than usual as he watched his daughter. Emily stood beside him, the email heavy in her pocket. "I got it," she blurted. Before fear could stop her, Nathan turned. "Got what?" "The scholarship. A full year. Pediatric nursing. Out of province." She couldn't bring herself to say the word Oregon out loud. Saying it would make the distance feel like a door slamming shut. For a long moment, Nathan said nothing. The waves lapped gently against the shore. Finally, he asked, "And how do you feel?" Her throat tightened. Terrified, excited, guilty. He nodded, the faintest smile pulling at his mouth. "That's how you know it's worth it." She blinked, stunned. "You think I should go?" He looked back at Lily, who was now proudly holding a stick like it was a royal scepter. "Emily, you've worked for this. You earned it. You don't turn away from the door you fought so hard to find." "But what about," she began, then stopped. Her voice faltered. He turned to her, eyes steady. "If what we're building here is real, distance won't break it. And if it isn't, staying won't save it." The words hit harder than she expected. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. She swallowed hard, blinking against the sting. I don't want you to think I used you, or that I'm walking away when things finally feel." She trailed off. "Good." He finished for her. She nodded, helpless. Nathan exhaled slowly, almost a laugh. "Emily, I don't think you used me. You've done the opposite. You reminded me how to show up. For Lily, for myself." He hesitated, then added quietly, "For you too." Her chest ached. She wanted to step closer, to press her forehead against his shoulder, to ask him to promise they'd still be here when she returned. But before she could speak, a small voice interrupted. "Look what I made." Lily ran toward them, her hands clutching a paper chain she had been piecing together at daycare. "One link for every week," she explained proudly. "Until Emily comes back." Emily froze, her heart swelling and breaking all at once. She crouched to Lily's level. "You knew." Lily nodded, serious as only a 3-year-old could be. "Daddy told me. We're gonna count down. And when the chain is gone, you'll be here again." Nathan knelt beside his daughter, his arm around her small shoulders. "See," he said softly, "she already has more faith than both of us." Emily laughed through the tears threatening to spill. She pulled Lily into her arms and hugged her tightly. "You're braver than I am," she whispered into the girl's hair. That night, as Emily walked home, the city lights shimmered with new meaning. She had never been more afraid. And yet, for the first time, her fear wasn't of being abandoned, it was of daring to belong somewhere, with someone, and risking the loss that came with it. She looked up at the wide Vancouver sky, stars faint above the city glow, and let herself believe that maybe love could stretch across distance. Measured one paper chain link at a time, the day Emily left Vancouver. The sky was the same pale gray as her mood. Clouds hung low, the kind that made the mountains look softer, blurred at the edges. She stood outside the departure gate at the airport, clutching her backpack straps so tightly that her knuckles whitened. Nathan stood beside her, his tall frame steady, while Lily clung to Emily's leg, refusing to let go. Emily knelt down, brushing Lily's hair out of her eyes. "I'll be back before you know it," she whispered, though the lump in her throat made the words tremble. Lily pressed a small folded paper chain into her hands. The links were uneven, colored with crayons, each one marked with a wobbly number. "One for each week," Lily said seriously. "You can count with us. When the last one is gone, you'll be home." Emily hugged her tightly, breathing in the soft scent of baby shampoo. trying not to let her tears spill onto the child's small shoulders. Nathan's hand rested on Lily's back, his other hand brushing briefly against Emily's. It was the kind of touch that carried weight without asking for anything in return. "Go," Nathan said quietly. "Be everything you're meant to be. We'll be here." His eyes locked on hers, steady, sure. It was the kind of look that built bridges across oceans. Emily swallowed hard and nodded. She turned, forcing herself not to look back until she reached the security checkpoint. When she finally did, she saw Nathan lifting Lily onto his hip, waving with his free hand. Lily's voice carried even above the crowd. "Hearts don't care about distance." Those words became her anchor. The year that followed was the hardest of Emily's life. Oregon was new, unfamiliar, and demanding. Her scholarship program at the pediatric specialization was grueling, long nights filled with textbooks, endless clinical rotations, and moments when exhaustion clawed at her bones. There were days she questioned whether she had made a mistake, whether she had left behind too much. But every time she felt herself sinking, she reached for the paper chain tucked in the top drawer of her desk. Each week she tore off a link, smoothing the crayon numbers with her thumb before discarding them. The chain grew shorter. Hope grew taller. Messages from Nathan came sporadically, never overwhelming, always respectful. A photo of Lily's latest drawing, a snapshot of their dog-eared bedtime book, a line about how Lily had insisted pasta be eaten like Emily does, twirling it carefully on her fork. Emily responded with quick notes between classes, sometimes a funny story from the hospital, sometimes nothing more than a heart emoji. It was fragile, like writing letters on glass, but it was real. In quiet moments, Nathan drafted messages he never sent. He wanted to tell her how much Lily missed her, how the townhouse felt different without her laughter. He wanted to admit that he had started saving her seat at the cafe, even when she wasn't there. But he stopped himself. Emily had work to do, dreams to claim. He had promised not to hold her back. When the year finally closed, autumn leaves painted Vancouver gold again. Emily returned, stronger than she had ever been. Her shoulders were straighter, her step firmer. She stood outside the hospital on her first day as a registered nurse, her new ID badge clipped to her coat. Her name gleamed beneath the bold letters, registered nurse. She touched it once, as though to confirm it was real. She had done it. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, she received a message, rooftop garden. Look up. Curious, she made her way to the hospital's rooftop space. The garden stretched across the roof, lined with hanging lights and flowering herbs. In the center stood a long table covered with pastel-colored boxes, each marked with delicate script, for the women who stayed hungry to feed hope. Emily froze, her throat tightening. On the side of the packaging was a subtle silhouette, not flashy, not obvious, but unmistakably inspired by her. Her profile, rendered in lines so soft it looked like light itself. Nathan stood at the far end of the table, hands in his pockets, eyes warm. She walked toward him, her pulse loud in her ears. "You remembered everything," she whispered. "I remembered you," he said simply. For a moment they stood in silence, the noise of the city fading below them. Then Nathan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. He didn't kneel. He didn't give a rehearsed speech. He opened it, revealing a simple ring with a single stone that caught the garden lights. "I don't want to save you," he said quietly. "I want to stay if you let me." Emily's breath caught. She stared at the ring, then at Nathan, at the man who had once quietly paid for her dinner without a word. She thought of Lily's paper chain, the weeks counted down one by one, the lullaby that had bridged the past and present, the laughter in the library cafe. Her eyes stung. "Yes," she whispered, the word steady, certain. Nathan slipped the ring onto her finger. No applause, no spectacle, just a people in a rooftop garden, finally admitting they had found a place to rest. Later that night, they walked into the same restaurant where Emily had once sat alone, clutching a $10 bill. But this time, she wasn't alone. Nathan's hand was laced with hers, and Lily trotted just ahead of them in her navy dress, her pigtails bouncing with each step. The hostess greeted them warmly, leading them to a familiar table by the window. Emily sat down, glancing at Nathan. "You really do remember everything," he smiled, his gaze holding hers. "I remember the night everything began. Lily climbed into her chair and proudly pulled out a drawing from her backpack. A yellow house, a sun with a smiling face, and 3 stick figures at a dinner table. One with long hair, one tall with glasses, and one small with pigtails. Emily's chest filled, so full it almost hurt. This wasn't the table where she'd been abandoned anymore. It was the table where she belonged. The restaurant hummed with the soft rhythm of evening life, cutlery clinking, laughter rising from nearby tables, waiters weaving gracefully between chairs. To Emily, it felt like stepping back into the moment that had once broken her. Except this time, she wasn't trembling alone at the window with a crumpled bill in her purse. This time, her hand was wrapped in Nathan's, warm and sure, and Lily sat across from them coloring her paper placemat with crayons the server had offered. Emily let her gaze wander. The same flickering candles, the same navy linens, even the same photograph of the restaurant from decades past still hung crooked on the wall. But the weight pressing against her chest wasn't shame anymore. It was wonder. How could one place hold both the lowest and highest points of a person's story? How could she have once been invisible here and now be seen more fully than ever? Nathan studied the menu, though Emily suspected he already knew what he wanted. He glanced up, catching her watching him. "You're smiling," he said softly. She laughed under her breath. "I never thought I would. In this place." The waiter appeared to take their orders. But before Emily could speak, Nathan ordered her favorite pasta without needing to ask. She blinked, surprised. "You remembered." He tilted his head, eyes gentle. "I remember everything." Beside them, Lily slid her drawing across the table. "Look," she announced proudly. The picture showed 3 stick figures sitting under a bright yellow sun. One tall figure wore glasses, another had long hair, and the third had pigtails like hers. Above the house, in bright crayon letters, Lily had written one word: family. Emily pressed her lips together, her throat aching. She reached across the table to smooth the edge of the drawing with her fingertips. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Lily beamed, then leaned into Nathan's arm, utterly content. The food arrived. Warm plates set before them. Emily twirled her fork slowly, watching the steam curl upward. She thought of the girl she had been, the one who had sat here praying for a man to show up, believing that if he didn't, it meant she wasn't worth the effort. She wanted to reach back through time and take that girl's hand, whispering, "Stay. Someone is watching. Someone will see you." Nathan broke the silence. "Do you ever think about that night?" "All the time," she admitted. "But not because it hurt, because it changed everything. If I hadn't been left behind, I never would have found." This, she gestured around the table, to him, to Lily, to the steady glow of belonging. He nodded slowly, as though turning the thought over in his mind. "Funny," he said. "I used to believe beginnings had to look like fairy tales. Perfect timing, grand gestures. But the truth is, the best things start in the cracks, in the broken places." Emily met his gaze, her heart swelling at the honesty there. Then maybe broken isn't such a bad thing. The conversation fell into a quiet comfort, filled with small exchanges, Lily asking for more lemonade, Nathan wiping a smudge of sauce from her chin, Emily laughing when Lily insisted the breadbasket was all hers. They were the kinds of details that, to anyone else, might seem unremarkable. But to Emily, each one was proof. She was no longer waiting for life to begin. She was living it. As dessert plates were cleared, Nathan reached across the table, covering her hand with his. No theatrics, no performance, just the steady warmth of contact. "You know," he said quietly, "the first night I saw you here, I thought you looked like someone holding up the whole world alone. And I recognized it because I'd done the same." She tightened her grip on his hand. "And now," he said, smiling faintly, "we hold it together." Emily's eyes shimmered. But this time the tears weren't from pain. They were from fullness, from gratitude so vast she didn't know how to contain it. She lifted her glass of water, her voice soft but certain. "To broken places," she said, "and to what grows in them." Nathan clinked his glass lightly against hers. "To what grows," Lily, catching the rhythm of the moment, raised her half-empty lemonade. "To family," she squeaked. Both adults laughed, the sound weaving into the hum of the restaurant like music. Later that night, as they stepped out into the cool air, the city lights glittered above them. Emily slipped her arm through Nathan's. Lily skipping between them with her small hand clutching both theirs. For the first time, Emily didn't wonder what would happen next or whether the happiness would last. She only knew that she belonged in this moment, with these two people, walking down a street in Vancouver with the kind of certainty she had never dared believe in before. The night was quiet, but inside her, something rang louder than any bell above a restaurant door. Not desperation, not longing, just the soft, steady truth. She was home.